Welcome back to another episode of Creepy and Haunted Places. In this video, we take a look at 5 locations. Some of them known, some of them not known unless you're a local, and some of them you couldn't pay me to spend the night in, not even for $1 million. Known as the Old Western Burying Ground, the cemetery was purchased in 1786 and soon became a final resting place for the region's elite. Because of local laws, it was required that proper cemeteries had to be physically connected to a church, and because of property being expensive, a church was built in the very center of the graveyard in 1852, creating a catacomb system between its supporting arches under the floor. By the 1920s, the churchgoers eventually moved into the suburbs, leaving the graveyard deserted and the victim of desecration for decades. In the 1970s, the University of Maryland purchased the property, and in 1981, a trust was formed to manage and restore the property. Aside from numerous politicians and war veterans of the War of 1812, the cemetery also holds a plot for celebrated and noted poet and writer Edgar Allan Poe. Visitors have reported seeing headless apparitions, heard disembodied voices and footsteps, and even felt the cold grip of ghost-like hands. Aside from capturing misty figures, ghost hunters have captured EVPs, but this is not where this ends. Many suspect the cause of the activity is the church because of its placement within the cemetery, having left many tombs inaccessible to visitors and upsetting the spirits within. This ties in with the movement of the graves. A section of Revolutionary War soldiers was later discovered under one of the walkways, and sadly, some of the bodies that were moved were never found again. Scarily of all of this are the spirits that have been reported more often than others. A white-haired spirit has been reported to walk up and down the rows as if looking for a certain marker. In the catacombs can be heard the crazed laughter of a mental patient, who is said to be so deep in insanity that she was buried in a straitjacket. The ghost of a 16-year-old girl named Lucia Watson, who died in 1816, has been seen kneeling by her own grave, praying in a white dress with long hair. And if you dare to disrespect a grave in this cemetery, the ghost of an old caretaker is said to appear, swear, and curse while chasing you out of the cemetery wielding a shovel. Leamaneh Castle was built in 1480 by Turlough O'Brien, King of Thomond. The name is said to derive from the term the horse's leap. In 1543, Turlough's son Morro surrendered the castle and his Irish loyalty to King Henry VIII. In return for adopting English customs and laws and becoming Anglican, he was created an earl and a baron. The tower was extended in 1648 by Conor O'Brien and his wife Mary, and a 4-story mansion house was added, still standing in the ruins to this day. His wife, who today is known as Mary Rua, or Red Mary because of her hair, was said to be formidable, and is a feature character in many folk tales. One such account by Mary Chatterton in 1839 states that in 1651, Conor was mortally wounded by one of 5 men sent by General Ireton to kill him. Conor's men brought him back to his wife, who was said to go to the tower and yell, "What do I want with dead men?" Hours later, Conor died, and Mary set off in her best dress and carriage for Limerick to fight for the right to retain her lands. There, she offered to marry any willing Cromwellian officer and was soon wed to a captain. It's rumored that days later, after an argument, her new husband had been pushed out of a 3rd-story window. From there, she went on to wed 25 husbands. After killing her last, her enemies captured her and sealed her inside a hollow tree. Her specter is said to be haunting Leamaneh Castle. A remote canyon in the Santa Ana Mountains, Black Star Canyon is a popular attraction because of its wild scenery. Over the years, it has become an important archaeological site due to the number of artifacts belonging to the Tongva Gabrielino Indians that once inhabited the area. It is said to be the site of a great battle between the Tongva Indians and the American fur trappers that happened in 1831, known as the bloodiest battle in the Santa Ana Mountains. The Indians in the mountain and desert were fond of horse flesh, and when the missions in the area began breaking up, they would steal horses from the Spaniards. When the fur trappers went into California from New Mexico, they offered a solution to end the horse theft with their daring and guns to gain the Spaniards' good faith. The fur trappers followed the Indian Trail across the Santa Ana River and up the Santiago Canyon to the Canyon de los Indios. They made their way carefully to the campsite where the Indians were feasting on horse meat. It was either the crack of the rifle or the sight of a fellow wounded Indian that gave them their first warning of another's presence. It was on that night that an unfair battle was fought, and the fur trappers won out over the Indians. The ones that managed to survive quickly fled, and the fur trappers gathered up the horses and returned them to their owners. Under Spanish rule, the canyon was renamed Cañada de los Indios. After coal was found in the canyon in 1879, the Black Star Mining Company was founded. However, a survey was run in the 1870s, and it was found that the land was not public. After a time, it was sold back to the original owners, who lost interest when the mine had no profit. Because of the battle in 1831, many urban legends were formed, stating that the mine was haunted. It hosted its second murder in 1899, after the canyon had been settled by Anglo-American and Mexican homesteaders. On June 9, 1899, James Gregg and his brother-in-law Decatur Harris, along with a 13-year-old boy Clinton Hunt, arrived at the Hidden Ranch, owned by Henry Hungerford, for the purpose of driving out some stock that Gregg owned. Gregg and Hungerford argued. The second owner, George Howard, was said to owe Gregg $10 on a horse trade. That night, Gregg Harris and the boy slept outside the house. The next morning, Gregg was rolling up the bedding when Hungerford came out and the argument resumed. It ended in a shooting, and Gregg on the ground. They drove to Santa Ana, where they turned themselves in to the sheriff. Gregg died later that day. The trial came before Judge Ballard, who convicted Henry Hungerford of the murder. But later on, a new trial was sought, and Judge Ballard granted the motion. The case was later dismissed. Many have claimed to have seen cults in the canyon at night, performing rituals, leading police to issue a warning not to go alone or at night. A story also tells of a group of friends who parked in front of the locked gate one night and witnessed a procession of dwarf-like figures coming down the shadowy trails. Realizing the dwarves were headed right for them, the kids quickly put their car in reverse. But as they drove away, they saw that the movements of their pursuers were speeding up, as if in pursuit of the vehicle. And if that isn't terrifying enough, in the late 70s, there was a school bus that went over the cliff in the canyon, killing the driver, the teacher, and most of the kids on board. To this day, people have reported hearing screams coming from the bus, and seen what looks like shadow children trying to get away from the wreckage. Located between Venice and Lido in northern Italy, the island was first mentioned in the Chronicles of 421. Its population grew in the 9th century, and was soon governed by a podesta. When it came under attack by the Genoan fleet, its citizens were moved to Giudecca. It remained uninhabited until 1793, when the island became a confinement station for the victims of the plague that were being carried on cargo ships to the checkpoint on Poveglia. In 1805, under the rule of Napoleon Bonaparte, the role of the confinement became permanent, and an old bell tower was converted into a lighthouse. It closed 11 years later. In the 20th century, it was used again as a quarantine station until 1922, when the buildings were converted into a mental asylum for long-term care patients, until 1968, when it was closed and the island was again abandoned. Its gruesome history revolved around a doctor who was said to experiment on his patients by means of lobotomies. It is stated that he later threw himself from the hospital tower after claiming that the ghost of his former patients had driven him mad. But before you start packing your bags to investigate, here's a downside. The island has been closed, and tourists and locals alike are forbidden from visiting, and even fishermen have begun to steer clear of the island. The tolling of the long-since-gone bell can still be heard emanating from the island, and people who have visited the island later returned and refuse to ever visit there again because of the evil energy the island hosts, to match the disembodied voices that ordered them to leave and do not return. In the small town of Cefalù, on Sicily's northern coast, sits a small building that is rapidly falling victim to the tides of time. Looking at the single-story dwelling, you would probably not think that it's been abandoned for 89 years, or imagine the myriad of dark rituals and happenings that took place within. The Abbey, whose name came from a satire penned by François Rabelais, was given that title by a man who was so perverted, so corrupt, and licentious, that many people will still not set foot near the structure. A man who was written about in a song by Ozzy Osbourne, Aleister Crowley. He purchased the building in 1920, turning it into an anti-monastery, a place, he stated, where the inhabitants' lives are not spent in laws, statutes, or rules, but according to their own free will and pleasure. But it also served as a school that revolved around the practice of black magic and manifesting their quote-unquote true will. Two women who joined the ranks soon became pregnant by Crowley. One suffered a miscarriage, but the other had a daughter on December 11, 1920. The child would later move to America to start a new life with her aunt. It was in 1923 that the Abbey saw its first death. A 23-year-old Oxford undergrad named Raoul Loveday died after taking place in a satanic ritual. His wife stated that the death was due to her husband ingesting the blood of a sacrificed cat, but in reality, it was due to acute enteric fever from the consumption of spring water. Upon her return to London, Betty Loveday gave an account to the Sunday Express of the happenings at Thelema, which resulted in Benito Mussolini demanding that Crowley leave the country. After he left and the Abbey was abandoned, residents painted over every mural inside and out. In 1955, an American filmmaker and devotee of Crowley, Kenneth Anger, filmed a documentary about the Abbey, uncovering some of the murals that the locals had hidden. The name, Abbey of Thelema, is still popular among some covens, magical societies, and is the name of the fan club dedicated to rock star Marilyn Manson. Even though the structure is quickly falling apart, and many locals refuse to save it because of its dark influence, and its connection to the person they claim was Satan incarnate, it still draws thousands of visitors, some of whom have erected a shrine in the last room where the murals were uncovered. Despite all of this, it remains on the market for 1.2 million euros. And that's all the time we have for this episode of Creepy and Haunted Places. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. And the next time you get the urge to set foot in a creepy or haunted place, don't forget to bring a candle.